Okay, I think we're ready to roll. Share the screen. Okay. All right, we are coming down the home stretch. Oh, okay. Anybody recognize this magazine? Anybody seen this magazine? Cody, have you ever seen this magazine? I looked at it the other day and I said to my wife, wow, that girl in the middle looks so much like Cody. And she says, that is Cody. And I said, no. She says, yes, it is. I look closer and I open it up and it says Cody right inside. So we have a star here on campus. And yeah, this thing is published nationwide, internationally. So neat. I thought I would embarrass you with that, but good job. All righty, let me get this sheet passed around so that I can preserve my marriage, because if I forget this thing anymore, here you go. All righty. So today we're going to have prayer, and we will turn it over to Arlene, and then David on Tuesday, and Abby on Thursday, and that'll be it, except for the final exam. Okay. All right, let's pray together. We give you thanks again, Father, for your grace and mercy to us. Thank you for allowing us to have a worldview that is based on eternal truth, not because we sought it or in any way interested in it, but because you came after us. You loved us, you pursued us. And so now we can study all these things from a vantage point that we know to be true and accurate because you have made it known to us. We love you for that. We want to serve you and honor you. And I pray that our time spent together today would enable us to do that a little more accurately in terms of the type of world that we live in. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. All right, Arlene, I'm going to give you this. Unless you want to come up here like Tyler did. All right. See, you started something. Yeah, that thing might, just a second.
It's going to be fun later.
Yeah, 1 second. I may get a hold of Joel again while you're.
Yeah, do it. Okay. All right. So I read an article called The Difference Bonding Makes. And in this article, the authors start off with an illustration of a newborn baby and the bond that this newborn baby has with its mom and dad, specifically with its mom. And so the author begins by talking about how the birth is essentially an entrance into a new culture with new sights, new sounds, new smells, new positions, and a new environment. So you have a baby that's been in this environment for like the last 9 months. And then the baby comes into this new world and is immediately bonded to the first people that it sees, its mom and dad. And so the authors use this illustration to talk about how, in a lot of ways, as missionaries enter a new culture, they have the opportunity to also bond with a new family that they have in the new place that they're going to be ministering to people. And so they say the adults' senses too are bombarded by a multitude of new sensations, sights, sounds, and smells. And so that's just kind of the theme of the article as a whole is bonding in just different ways that missionaries can bond. So they go through and they establish a couple of points. One is how to establish a sense of belonging through bonding. And the authors really highlight the importance of the first couple of months and how crucial that is in establishing a bond between the missionaries and the families of the new culture. They talk about how, because it's such a new experience, if missionaries open themselves up to living in a home with a host family, that inevitably creates deeper relationships, because that provides the opportunity for the missionaries to learn more one-on-one with the host family, and they learn about language, they learn about cultures, and they really learn about the why behind people do what they do. And so, one of the quotes here is, if a missionary is to establish a sense of belonging to the people among whom the missionary is called to serve, the way he or she spends the first few weeks can be critical. And so that's why the authors talk about the importance of staying with a family versus arriving to a new place and choosing to first go maybe with, let's say, if you go with like BMM and then going and speaking with other people who are also from the United States, because that's one of the things that a lot of people will do sometimes because that's comfortable, because those are people from your own culture. And so that can take away from the bonding experience that you can have with the families that are willing to host you and willing to show you their ways. And there's just an opportunity there to create deeper and more meaningful relationships. And so, as the article just kind of progresses, they talk about learning the language and how oftentimes people that are hosting missionary families are just eager and excited to show people, um, and to teach them about their culture, and how that also helps establish and build deeper relationships. And a lot of times, as newcomers, you're just really needy and you're kind of vulnerable and you're kind of at the mercy of the people that you're with. And as a result of that, the families that you're with are going to want to help you because they see that you're in need, and they have a desire to be hospitable, and they have a desire to help those that are in need. And so the authors talk about how you can use that as a means to bond, with the people of that culture as well. So, um, let me see. I really liked how the authors also talked about, Jesus, and when Jesus came into the world, and just how that would have been like a brand new experience for him as well, coming from heaven and then just coming down to earth, and just, that whole transition and what that would have been like, and how he was, still bonded to God the Father and everything. I thought that that was really cool. Um, and he just talks about how, as Christians, we can try to emulate Christ-like character and seeking to bond with those around us as well, the same way that Jesus sought to create deep and meaningful relationships with those around him. And so there are 4 points that the authors bring up to help kind of create meaningful and bonded relationships. One is, be willing to live with a local family. Two, limit personal belongings. Three, use only local or public transportation. And four, expect to carry out language learning in the context of relationships that the learner is responsible to develop and maintain. They say newcomers need to be encouraged to totally immerse themselves in the life of the new community from day one. If a newcomer is going to successfully establish himself as a belonger, live with a local family, and learn from relationships on the streets, a prior decision and commitment to do so is essential. Without such a prior commitment, it doesn't usually happen. And so that just kind of goes along with, a lot of times missionaries might not have a set plan as far as what they're going to do once they actually arrive. And so as a result of that, it can be really easy for those missionaries to become isolated and to feel lonely in that new culture. And so these authors really just push towards, you know what, put yourself kind of at the mercy of the people of that culture, and they're going to want to help you. And as a result of that, that's going to help create meaningful relationships. And I really like the way that they just kind of summarize, the article by saying it's not easy to live with a family, make friends with strangers, and learn a new language. But it's also not easy to continue as a stranger, living without close relationships with insiders or an understanding of their cultural cues. And so basically, what they're saying is, you're going to struggle no matter what in a new culture. So you can either seek to be intentional and build deep, meaningful relationships by seeking to bond with the people of that culture and putting yourself quite literally in their home and using that to minister to people. Or you can just try to stay comfortable and only adapt to certain things that you're okay with. And as a result of that, you'll probably feel isolated in that culture. you're also going to struggle. So the authors just kind of encourage anyone seeking to go to a new culture to seek to bond and establish meaningful relationships by just being as involved as can be with the families of that host culture. So.
Yeah, interesting statement you made there that you're going to struggle one way or the other in a different culture. You're either going to struggle by resisting and then feeling awkward for, time ad infinitum, or you're going to struggle, and make it happen. So, one kind of struggling can be perpetuated by neglecting it, by refusing it. The other kind of struggling is more short-lived because you're forcing yourself to get in and get involved. But I will say this: you do need a break. The people have burned themselves out by just insisting on completely immersing themselves 100%, 24/7, and you can't do that. I mean, maybe you can. I haven't met anybody else at this point who really can. I remember sitting in church, listening to a message, and just when I'm learning Portuguese, and there comes a point when I just can't listen anymore. I mean, my mind will not process anymore, and so I have to get away. And that can be true with regard to other aspects of learning a culture too. Um, and if you are the kind of person that is very sensitive to how others are looking at you, you're very aware of yourself and your presence, very self-conscious. You might find it more difficult and challenging to enter into another culture's, into a home. Just remember that they're just as nervous about how you view them as you are about how they view you. It's a two-way street. And so good. That was very good. Some good thoughts there. Who was the author again? Was that Nida? Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. Very good. All right. Well, appreciate that. Well done. We are down to the last cluster, ladies and gentlemen. So we are going to talk today about the Arab cluster. And actually, I think we got a little bit off here on the, let me get the issue. Let me go back here and see. Nope. No, sorry. Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah, for many Americans, and you see this in your notes here, this culture can be the most unfamiliar one. Why would you suppose that's true? Why is the Arab cluster often considered the least familiar? Okay. Yeah. And you or anybody, can you think of a way in which that's true? Why is it so different in relation to other cultures? Okay. And those negative connotations come as a result of what? Hmm. Right. When you're not really familiar with a culture to begin with, and then that culture, does something in your culture that's radical, like 9/11, you tend to wrap your whole concept of that culture around that one event. Everything hinges on that. Right. Yeah. So David Livermore, really regards this as an unfortunate situation, and I think he's right because the vast majority of Arab people do not belong to the category of radical Muslims that we so easily use to stereotype the entire culture. So it's very important to keep that in mind. Anybody here been to an Arab country before? Okay. All right. So here's our map, and that's the last one, the Arab culture, the dark brown right in the center of the map. And you get a little closer here, you notice, well, there's just isolating it. Let me zoom in on that a little bit. the majority of the Arab culture, at least in terms of real estate, is where? North Africa. Yeah, just in terms of land mass, I mean, Saudi Arabia is huge, but um, North Africa takes in a lot of it. And again, keep in mind that sometimes a particular country can identify geographically with one region, but politically with another region. What country in this cluster would be an example of that? Of sure, yeah. What country in this cluster would geographically be associated with one region of the world, but politically another? Iraq would be, how would that be? Because Iraq is pretty much Middle East no matter how you slice it, right? When you think of Iraq, you think Middle East. Egypt, okay? Geographically, Egypt is North Africa, okay? But politically, it's often associated with the Middle East. Okay, when you talk about Middle East affairs and things going on, oftentimes, this is probably more true previously than it is today. When I was growing up, Egypt was very, very much in the news alongside of Israel and things like that. So just, yeah, it's not so much true today, but that's something that you need to keep in mind. Just like Mexico is actually considered North America, okay, on many maps because of its geographic connection, but considered Latin American ethnically, culturally. So that can be confusing at times. Okay, so let's begin with a few notable characteristics of Arab culture. I'm just going to double check and make sure the mic is working. I don't think the adjustment he made, yeah, it looks like we're good to go here. All right. So some characteristics of Arab culture. It is more a cultural identity than an ethnic heritage. Okay, that's very important to keep in mind. When you look at that map, the cluster itself, there's quite a diversity of ethnicities within the Arab cluster. Okay, North Africans, very much more the black ethnicity, whereas Middle Eastern, okay, and they're different. And so we tend to put them together, okay, as one, you know, and we also tend to think of all of them as Muslims. And even though the Muslim religion dominates, it's not exclusive, and it certainly is not limited to that cluster, right? So the dominant language in this cluster would be Arabic. Being an Arab and speaking Arabic are usually synonymous, right? By the way, Arabic is a beautiful language. I love to see the language written. It's a very beautiful language. 60% of the world's oil is there. I've often wondered how long is oil going to continue to be a dominant bargaining chip in the world economy. I used to think that oil would eventually go away and everything would become nuclear, but you know, development of nuclear technology is very, very slow in coming. And I think oil is going to be around for a long time, if not until the Lord comes. I don't know. I'm not a prophet, but it's certainly not going away anytime soon. What's the big issue in the news that had to do with this part of the country and shipments, not necessarily just of oil, but of other things? What was the big disaster that took place? Remember? Yeah, yeah, in the Suez Canal, got sandwiched right in, and I'm assuming by now that's been what, 2-3 weeks ago. I'm assuming they got that unplugged, right? Things are flowing again. But it's, it's just a reminder that with all of the technology and the advances that we've made, something as simple as a boat getting stuck can still bring about worldwide repercussions. It's amazing. Hopefully that's fixed by now. Modern cities mingle among the ancient ones in the Arab world. Quite a diversity among religions. I'm sorry, among urban and rural locations. And then letter E, Arabs are vibrant people with a strong sense of loyalty for family and close friends. Family is really a key. And, family is a key everywhere. Our culture is experiencing the attempted dismantling of the family, not just the family, but of gender identity, period. And in fact, I was listening to a podcast this morning explaining that in the UK right now, there was an attempt at passing a law prohibiting therapy, which would in any way attempt to persuade a person with regard to his or her gender identity. It would even make it illegal for the church and, yes, even parent-child conversations about identity to take place. Just crazy stuff going on. That's the UK, but same type of thing is happening on our side of the ocean as well. But one of the strongest bonds of family can be found in the Arab world. Right? Very, very strong. So let's talk a little bit about the Arab family. Cute. Honor and respect in the family must be maintained at all costs. Man. Now, the word honor should catch your attention. It's an honor-shame culture, very much so. They're just not optional. Disrespecting authority is simply not tolerated. It doesn't happen. Well, it happens, but B, Arabs are patriarchal. The father is responsible for the family's well-being, and the children are loyal. And again, like we've said so many times this semester, there is the impact of globalization, the influence of the Western world that has made a difference, but still, this is very, very much the overwhelming case. All right? The larger the family, the better, both economically and in terms of prestige. In our culture, does the number of kids that you have or the size of your family have any impact on your position in society? Not really. Your ability to get a job, the way that you're viewed in your community, really, your church has nothing to do with whether you have one child or 10 children, or more. Or if you don't have any children at all. It's just not an issue in our culture, but you need to be aware of how much of an issue that is. Now, we said economically and in terms of prestige, I think you're all aware that at least in some places of the world, it's also, at least in the case of Arab Muslims, it becomes a means of what? Large families become a means of what in some Muslim countries? Or even in non-Muslim countries? Comes with propagating the faith. This is happening in the UK, okay, and in other countries as well. I don't know about Germany, David. Do you know, are you aware of that at all in the situation in Germany? I know that in the UK, it's definitely an issue. Muslim residents having large families, part of the idea behind that is to promote the Muslim population. Male offspring are more important, excuse me. A son can bring honor, but the daughter can bring shame. Now, don't take that too much to an extreme, but that would be a tendency In other words, it's much easier for a daughter to bring shame than it is for a son. Now, that's not just true of the Arab world. How many of you have studied the Spartans? You know, yeah. We just studied the Spartans back in the 4 or 500 BC. If a child was born and it was a little girl and the father didn't think that the girl looked like she would be a good soldier, they could simply set her out in the back and let her go. And somebody maybe would come pick her up, maybe not. I mean, it was, so that's not something unique or limited to the Arab culture. All right. And so, it is a consideration. Letter E, the family and business are often integrated. And of course, this was actually true also even in our culture back when we were more agricultural. The farm was a family affair. But when we became industrialized, that began to change. And the ability for children to go out and find something else to do with their lives, all that began to crank during the days following the Industrial Revolution. So I don't know how true this is in the Arab world. I know that in Europe, and you even see it sometimes here in America, you'll find the family business downstairs on the street level, and then there'll be an apartment directly above it where the family lives. That was even true in the Roman Empire. In the first century, that was a common thing, and it's been passed on. I don't know to what extent that sort of thing happens in the Arab world, but I would guess, given the family business, the family and the business connection, that would probably be the case. What about Arab fashion? Arabs love fashion. They like expensive brands. Well, so do some of you, right? I'm not good with brands. I can't look around the room and say, oh, yeah, that one costs money. Oh, those shoes, yeah, $150. I can't do that. My son is, my youngest son, he is an expert on athletic shoes. He studies those things all the time. I'm just not good at that. I have no idea what I'm wearing. I don't know what brands these are. Most of it's probably stuff from Kohl's. I don't go there. My wife buys everything I wear. They enjoy using rich cologne. And again, I'm not a connoisseur of cologne and perfume. I have no idea what's considered, maybe some of you do. I mean, is it based on how long the smell persists, the scent, or is it, something else? I don't know. Is it true that they still make colognes and perfumes out of skunk oil because it's so lasting? They used to. You know that? They used to use skunk spray. They'd fix it, obviously. And then they would add scents to it, and it would, I don't know, I'm talking out of my league here. But they enjoy using. So if you want to buy a gift for someone from the Arab culture, and again, this is stereotypical, but typically this type of thing would be very much appreciated. In many cases, Western and traditional practices can be mixed. Again, globalization, the influence of the West, and all that stuff. They can be mixed together. And then, as you may remember, if you've studied the Muslim faith, a plain white headdress means that you have not yet done Hajj. What's Hajj? I won't pick on those of you who've studied non-Christian religions, even though I'm tempted to. What is Hajj? It's one of the five. Huh? It's the pilgrimage. I have a strong feeling that others of you knew the answer, but just are being humble. Yeah, that lifetime, that once in a lifetime, at least, pilgrimage. Now I'm talking about Muslims here, okay? So I want to be careful because it's really, really easy to just allow Arabs and Muslims to become one and the same, and they are not. And we'll see that in just a few moments. But in the case where an Arab is a Muslim, one of the goals is to make a trip to Mecca at least once in your lifetime. You don't have to do that in order to, to go to heaven, so to speak. If you have physical or economic justification for not going, you are excused. But that's the goal. All right, ladies, women's dress is more varied than men's. Excuse me. Okay. Would you say that's true in American culture in general? Would you say that ladies are more varied in their fashion choices than men are? Okay, I see some ladies saying yes. Men, do you agree with that? Okay. Yeah. And by the way, men and ladies, it's, shoes aren't just a ladies thing. I think probably in general, I just talked about my son, but in his case, it's athletic shoes, basketball shoes he's into. Okay, he doesn't have a lot of dress shoes. Yeah. So that's interesting. In an Arab culture, the women's dress would be much more varied than the men's. The most traditional dress would be in Saudi Arabia. In other words, the strictest, the most limited in terms of options would be in Saudi Arabia because it's the strictest Muslim. It is a Muslim state, so you would expect that. Jordan, on the other hand, is more contemporary. By the way, let's throw a little Bible into here. What countries in the Bible would correspond to modern day Jordan? Just a random question for you. There are 3 countries that are fairly commonly mentioned in the Old Testament that would correspond to modern day Jordan. You're getting ready for orals and you might get eschatology. The book of Daniel, chapter 11, says that this part of the world will actually escape the Antichrist's attempts to draw it into his kingdom. It won't be overtaken by him. Well, one of them was founded by the daughters of, or the sons of Lot in his incestuous relationship with his daughters. 2 of those. What are they? Moab and what's the other one that came from them? Pardon? Okay, now Edom is another one of the 3, but Ammon is the other one. Ammon and Moab came from those 2 daughters. Okay. Edom comes from Edom means red. Esau, right? Yeah, yeah. Okay. Anybody here going to be doing orals? You guys see these? You done? Done? Anybody not done? What's that? No, this year. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so Ammon, Moab, and Edom are the 3 countries that kind of, I mean, it's not exact, but kind of constitute modern day Jordan. And Daniel 11 says that Antichrist will not be able to conquer them. So, and today, Jordan would be considered more of a friend of the West than most of the other countries, which is probably one of the reasons why it would be more contemporary in something like dress styles. So these are all things, little things that are interesting to know when you're considering that part of the world. Some Arab women feel freer by using head covers. Now, you might think that from a Western standpoint, you say, man, that seems so restrictive to have to put a head cover on every time you go out in public. But they don't see it that way. Notice I said some. It's not universal. But in some cultures, it actually is more of a sense of freedom. Why would that be? In what way would wearing a head cover constitute freedom for an Arab woman? What does it symbolize? You're right. Well, think about it, just natural. What would the head covering symbolize, even in the Bible? Submission, it does, right? And you see, the interesting thing is that the hair covering is a way for the woman to say, I reserve the beauty of my hair, of my head, for one man. And so it actually gives her a sense of security to wear that because it protects her, in a sense, from the attraction of other men and preserves her for her husband. And so many actually feel safer and freer to be who they are, to be for their husbands. My daughter um, had a Bible study for a while with an Arab gal who was studying. She lives in Turkey, and so it's a different part of the world. But she was of Arab descent, and she actually came to a baptism we had at our church. It was really cool. She sat right in the front row and watched the baptism. But she came to our house to visit one day, and when she came, she had her head covering on because she's a practicing Muslim. And at one point in the visit, she told my wife and daughter that she wanted to show them her hair. So what do? They went upstairs in the bedroom because I was at home and I couldn't see this. So they took her upstairs to my daughter's bedroom, and she removed her head covering to show my wife and my daughter her hair. Her hair was an important thing to her, and very beautiful hair. I never saw it. My wife and daughter told me she had beautiful hair, but see, in that culture, it would have been an embarrassment to her, a shameful thing for her to reveal her hair to me. You know, very, very different. In the Western culture, you go to a beauty salon. Why? So you can you know, put a head covering on? Is it? No, you like to show off your hair. Well, I shouldn't say show off, but you're not afraid to show your hair off to whoever you might be around, right? Trying to say that, the right way. It's not an issue. Just to kind of give you, this may be a little bit embarrassing, but I'm just trying to help you understand it. For some women, walking outside the house with the head uncovered is like asking a Westerner to walk outside in his underclothing. So, gentlemen, does that help you understand a little bit? So again, it's a very foreign idea to a Westerner, but I hope that helps you at least to appreciate it. Very interesting. The hair is the crown of a woman's beauty. There you go. That's a biblical concept. Yeah? It's also a symbol of submission, but Paul in 1 Corinthians 11 actually refers to the woman's hair as her crown. So now let me ask you this. Let's get theological here again. Do you agree that in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, the woman's hair is considered a covering as a symbol of submission to her husband? In 1 Corinthians 11, would you agree with that? Yeah, it is. Okay. If I came to you and said, well, that's purely a cultural thing. Paul was dealing with his culture when he wrote that book. He was dealing with the Corinthian culture. How would you respond to me if I insisted that that was merely a cultural situation? Yeah, in 1 Corinthians 11, the reference to the woman's hair and then the use of the veil, if I just said to you, that's all cultural. It means nothing in the Western world, and therefore, the whole idea of woman's submission and all that is purely cultural. How would you respond to that? That's not good enough. Okay. Okay, and actually, right in that very passage, Paul makes reference to the created order, just as he does in 1 Timothy 2 when he talks about a woman and her participation in teaching, in the church. So in both of those passages, Paul makes reference to the created order to show that the principle of submission is not cultural. Now, the expression of submission can be cultural. Okay? Ladies, most of you don't, I'm guessing most of you don't think that you have to wear a veil of some sort in order to show, respect for the authority of the man in society. Okay, now there are some who do. I have a friend who wears a covering every time she's in public because I think that's the reason. She believes that it's still, still viable, and I respect that. I don't think that personally that it's necessary because the way that a woman expresses submission from one culture to another may differ. Okay, but the principle of submission abides. Okay, that makes sense. So if you're in the Arab culture and you're in a Muslim community, which would be most of the Arab culture, I get that. You'll want to keep that in mind before you travel there. Ask the question: what's expected of me in that culture in terms of dress? And be very careful that you. And by dressing, by covering your head, you're not adopting the Muslim faith. And the reason for that is because it's not just a religious issue, it is a cultural issue in many of those countries. So that's a question you need to consider carefully when you travel there. Okay? Number 4, Arabs are very resourceful, although they are more being than doing. It would be a being culture, but they are very resourceful. Okay. Number 5, question: are the terms Arab and Islam synonymous? No, we've already made that statement. They are not. Please be careful that you don't assume that. Look, the same thing happens on the other side of the ocean. You know, the rest of the world tends to look at the West as being Christian. Oh, the West is Christian. World War II was started by Christians. World War I was started by Christians. You know, everything that happens in the Western world is Christian. And we say, well, no, it's not true. But so would they. If we say that every Arab is a Muslim or every Muslim is an Arab, you know, we're out of bounds. So we need to be careful. No, the answer is no, letter A. There are even Arab Jews. And Arabs make up only 15% of the Islamic faith. That's an incredible figure. Did you ever think about that? When we think of Islam, we think that, you know, largely of Arab people, but they're only 15%. What's the largest Muslim nation in the world? Indonesia, right? I don't remember the population, but they're certainly not Arab. Now, okay, there may be Arab descent involved. Remember that an Arab migration took place from the Middle East and North Africa, you know, down into parts of the Asian world, the South Asian world, and especially in Indonesia. North Africa, they're not Arabs by and large, okay? They are Africans, yet they make up a huge percentage of the population of Islam. Islam is dominant and shapes daily life more than most clusters. So even though Arabs only make up 15% of the entire Muslim faith, still most Middle East Arabs are Muslim, if that makes sense. Okay, most of them, it dominates there. Then the 5 pillars of Islam. Okay, can you guess them? Some of you have studied these. Or do I have them? Oh, I gave them to you. Nuts. All right. Okay, Shahada, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. If you say that and really mean it, you have become a Muslim. Salat is the prayer, and that refers to a number of things, but specifically the daily prayers that are made at certain times during the day. And a practicing Muslim will often take a prayer mat with him, and he will pray in the direction of Mecca. Zakat refers to purification, alms, giving of alms. Now, the giving of alms is a very small percentage. I think it's like 2 or 3%. It's not like a tithe, as we see in the Jewish case. And then Saum is fasting, refers to fasting. And fasting takes place during the month of Ramadan in a special way, more intense way. Then the Hajj that we mentioned earlier is the pilgrimage. And of course, they're short-term oriented. In other words, these are very brief periods of time. You know, you probably hear horror stories like people getting trampled during Ramadan, things like that. You know, be careful because, I mean, it probably happens, but I'm sure it doesn't happen as much as the media likes to make us think it does. So you have to be, you know, anytime the media is dealing with numbers, you gotta, it's kind of like Josephus. Josephus gave us a great history of the Jewish people, but he really liked to inflate numbers. All right, what about jihad? Now, some Muslims believe that jihad should be the sixth pillar. They would like to add jihad as a pillar. By the way, I know that this is non-Christian religions. I get that. And we are talking about the Arab cluster. Not all Arabs are Muslims. I get that too, even though most of them would be. So what are the two kinds of jihad, the two ways that Muslims tend to look at jihad? And they're very different from each other. Well, what's the more radical way of looking at jihad? Yeah, it's the military jihad, the conquering idea, right? But most Arabs, most Muslims, excuse me, most Muslims would not view the jihad as the military jihad. How would they view it? What does the jihad mean to them? Yeah, it really is more of the personal inner struggle. In other words, both of them jihad signifies struggle. One of them is the military struggle to conquer the infidels. The other, which most of them would adopt, is the inner personal struggle to be pure. It's not a military. They have to do with the interpretation of the Quran. The strict interpretation would lead you more to the militant idea, whereas the more figurative, less literal interpretation would lead you more to the idea of personal struggle. And of course, the two categories of Muslims, the two broad categories are, what are the two groups, the main divisions? Shiites and the Sunnis, exactly. And so, when you think of radical Islam and the more literal interpretation, the militant jihad, it's generally, not exclusively, but generally more the Shiite idea. Saddam Hussein was actually a Sunni, although he was a Sunni ethnically, but politically, he really was more of a Shiite. So anyway, just some interesting things to keep in mind. So jihad refers to the struggle against pride and idolatry. That's more the inner struggle that most Muslims would refer to. But it can also include the enemy, depending on one's interpretation of the Quran. And then B, most Arabs do not see themselves as enemies of the West. See, that's another thing that you and I have to really work hard to get over. I think probably fewer Westerners have traveled to this cluster than any of the other clusters that we've studied. And part of the reason is we have this idea that I'm going to be in danger if I go there. And the fact is the vast majority of people who live in the Arab cluster are not waiting to kill you when you get out of the airport. It's just that's a concept that has been kind of drilled into us, and it's unfortunate. All right, so what about the relationship between the West and the Arab world? So here's, I think, 3 true-false questions I have for you. One, it is not uncommon for Arab men to walk hand in hand in public, true or false? That is true. And it does not mean the same thing that 2 men walking hand in hand in the Midwest, down in Des Moines would mean, okay, or anywhere else in America, okay? If you see 2 men walking hand in hand, you're thinking, right? And it's not just true in the Arab world too. In Africa, that's also common, and in other places as well. So be really careful you don't draw conclusions based on what you associate these things with. Letter B, before commencing a business meeting in the Middle East, it is customary to engage in some initial small talk, true or false? True. Remember, they are more of a being than a doing culture. And so, sitting down and immediately talking about business is offensive. Okay. And so don't do it. When I get to know people here in America, I'll typically ask them early on, so what do you do for a living? And that's not offensive. It's a different culture. How about this one? Arab business people emphasize written agreements. That's false. That doesn't mean they don't have written agreements, but subpoint here, the spoken word is more important. The deal is done only when the parties have gone their way. So it's like, it's the idea that yes, you do sign a contract, but if circumstances change, the contract is changeable. Your signature is not nearly as binding in that contract as it would be in the Western world. Here, once you sign the contract, if you didn't read the small letters, the small wording, it's too bad. You're responsible because everything here applies. And that's just not true, at least not nearly to that degree. Now, when you can imagine some of the challenges of, let's say, a corporation from the West, wanting to cooperate, do international business partnership with somebody from an Arab culture. See, the Westerner is going to tend to say, this is binding and you have to go by this, period. This is the rule of our business. And he might say, well, yeah, but that was true when we did this, but things have changed. And the Westerner will view that as being deceitful or, disrespectful to the contract or being sly or something like that. He's simply viewing it as, hey, contracts are pieces of paper. The contract isn't king. What's king is, getting this done together. So, we have to be careful that we don't jump to conclusions when somebody changes. I put this in front of, it's in your notes, and so I'm not going to read through all of these, but you can see some fundamental differences between the Arab world and the Western world. And family is important in both, but it's more central in the Arab world than it is in the West. So notice that friends are peripheral. That doesn't mean they're not important. The family is extremely important, but friends are much less important. We place a lot higher premium on friends. In fact, I would guess that for some of you, you have friends who are closer than your own family members, okay, depending on your family and your situation. Honor, shame, obviously, very important. Time. See all those there. Okay, so let's finish with some do's and don'ts. I might let you go a little bit early just because I know how tired everybody is, how much you have to do. Do respect cultural norms regarding men and women. Okay, it's important. Our culture is trying frantically, at least some are, to eliminate all those distinctions. Do keep in mind that most Muslims won't eat pork or drink alcohol. When I was getting certified, we went to a restaurant, and I've sat across the table from an Arab Muslim. And we were talking about that. It reminded me so much of the Jewish faith. There are commonalities between the Arab faith and Jewish faith, especially when it comes to things like dietary laws. Don't use your left hand. Well, that sounds familiar. Where else don't you use your left hand? What other culture? What other cluster? South Asia, right. In India, for example, and others as well. Left-handed people do have more trouble. Don't touch anything with the left hand. Now, if you grow up in that culture, you won't have trouble because you'll do it from the time you're very little. Okay? It is unclean, reserved for personal hygiene. Now, again, they understand the West, and they're probably not going to jump all over you if you do it. But like I said, David Livermore always said he would spend a couple of weeks practicing not using his left hand before he would go. But even then, it's so ingrained in us, it's hard to. All right, and then finally, this may sound a little strange, but the encouragement to visit this part of the world. Okay, I just, visiting is, it's not only good for you to learn, but it also shows them that you are interested in their part of the world. All right. Does anybody care if I let you go 15 minutes early? Oh. Prof always feels sad when people are excited about leaving early. I feel really hurt and offended. Actually, I'm starving, so let's go. We didn't mention food today.